All right. And so Paul, I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we start, Sally just walked in, so I'm just going to give Sally a chance to introduce herself.
Good morning. I'm late Sally Hopkins. I'm just happy to be here and see all of you this morning and be here with Paul and in his environment. Thank you.
My environment, that's scary, but yeah, this is also known as my man cave. This is where I put all my good TV screens and all that. Lena thinks I come here just to watch videos. So good morning, everyone. Paul Joseph on the select board right now. And I hesitate to call it Paul's presentation. I'd rather think of it as Paul's sort of stimulated conversation facilitation. Obviously, having a couple of members of the Charter and Bylaw Review Committee here is great. Having current and former elected and appointed officials is important. But I really felt that this topic warranted a focused discussion today. I don't have a ton of background information to share in terms of progress to date. I heard Ricky at the very beginning, you had mentioned hearing an update on where the Town Governance Study Committee is and where the CBRC is with its work. I don't have specific updates on behalf of those committees, but rather I wanted to kind of step back and just take a broader view of, well, why are these committees meeting at this moment in time? What is it that we're looking at? Speaking personally now, what is it that I feel so urgent about? I think everyone agrees that governance is important. And I've been having this conversation about the difference between importance and urgence a lot over the last couple of years. But part of the reason I'm sitting here as an elected select board member, I ran on 3 issues. One was at the time we needed to hire a town administrator. The second was that we were coming out of COVID into an uncertain economy. And the third was governance. Honestly, it was one of those things that I felt strongly about when I left the select board in 2013. So much so that I felt I was going to pull the Charter Commission paperwork back then. And I was encouraged by then peer to say, well, we're going to be looking at this, so there's no need to do that just yet. Only to find out 6 months later, well, now is not the time. And it hasn't been the time for the last 10 years. So I ran on this issue yet again, and Sue Salamoff, who is participating as an ex officio member of these appointed select boards Town Governance Study Committee, and I back in 2021 had asked that we put governance at the forefront of one of the select board goals. And a byproduct of that initiative was that we did promote and recruited for what was referred to and is referred to as the Town Governance Study Committee. And the goal of that committee at the time was really, there's a charge online. I can go to that website perhaps maybe later to talk about it. But in broad strokes, it was to understand how well the government is working, what can and should be changed, what are some alternatives, but not necessarily to be the replacement for a charter commission, which I'll talk about in a moment, is a legislative process to change the charter of the town. And so I really felt the urgency was there, as did Sue, that we really look into this. And flash forward a couple of years now we've got 2 committees. One is formed by the town meeting, which is a fairly regular, I think it's no less than every 5 years, appointment of the town meeting, the Charter and Bylaw Review Committee. So there's been a standing entity in town meeting that's designed to, sorry, I think it's a dumpster pickup time. So you might be hearing some loud thuds out the door. Apologies for the background noise if you hear it. So the Charter and Bylaw Review Committee has always served the town meeting function of reviewing the charter, making sure that it's current, making sure that the language is still in parity with what we need to continue down legally appropriate path, that the wording is correct and that it stays current. Now, years ago, as a former town meeting member, I had asked the moderator and other members, well, why can't we use this standing committee to consider formal changes to the structure of government? And at the time I was told, well, this is more of an administrative thing. We look at this, making sure that the wording is correct, making sure it's more of a tertiary sort of document that's or review of the document. It's less about the structure of the government and more about making sure the charter is consistent with what we want it to govern. That has now changed under the current iteration of the Charter and Bylaw Review Committee. And I don't disagree, by the way, with the current iteration of the Charter and Bylaw Committee. I always felt like we were doing a disservice to town meeting by not looking more aggressively at the entire form of government and how it's working, and using the CBRC as a, what I consider a well check on how well our systems were working. So that's sort of a long-winded preamble to what got us here. So what I wanted to really focus on today was just kind of talk about the two processes and step back and really talk about what my personal urgency is with this. And I think I can summarize my urgency in 2 to 3 major points. One is efficacy of governance. We have professional staff that is hired by the town. The select board hires certain members, such as the town administrator and the chiefs of police and a few others, veterans officer and the like. But in talking to the administrator and having worked with the town administration back 10 years ago, one of my clear observations at the time, back in 2010 to 13, when I first was serving on the board, was that we have a lot of well-intentioned, but not necessarily current volunteers that are advising people that are now serving in professional roles that have master's degrees in public administration. They have master's degrees in their specialized fields. And while we as volunteers have the right, and we should be overseeing and representing the voice of the community in those functions, I felt like we consistently get in the way of the professionals we hire to run the town on our behalves. And so there was, in my opinion, a lot of time burden spent by professional staff responding to inquiries, not necessarily concerted inquiries either, a lot of one-off ad hoc requests of the administration. And I think this worked well at the time when we first created the charter and we had a smaller town and things were a little more, well, say, post-World War II, predictable US growth oriented, right? We enjoyed a lot of stability in this country up until really the last couple of recessions, and now especially through the pandemic, we've got a lot of uncertainty. But the United States was pretty much the dominant superpower. Every generation was expected to generate more in revenue than its previous generation in income, and supposedly we were on this track to continue to grow and do better. Well, as those trends started to change with the start of the retirement of the baby boom generation, I'm a Generation X individual, we saw the start of a lot of volatility in our economy. So that's part of why I got involved, was when the Johnson School was threatened to be closed in 2008. We had to vote for an override at the time to make up for our operating budget deficit. And so that little volunteer step for me pulled me into, well, why is it this way? And how does it work? And what more can I be doing coming at government with an MBA and more with a business orientation? And the more I got involved as a volunteer, creating and serving as the chair of the Economic Development Committee, serving on the select board, I interacted more and more with these various appointed and elected bodies. And what I saw was that, again, we were trying to professionalize our staff while at the same time working through and with a body called town meeting on the legislative side, and the select board, school committee, and planning board as the major elected boards on the executive side of government. And I felt strongly that as volunteers, when I served back then as chair, I was putting in probably hundreds of hours each year, and when I served on the select board, of volunteer time. And I can honestly say, just this past year when I served as chair, especially with topics such as the South Natick Dam, the Elliott School, and a convicted felonious police officer, I spent 60 hours a week as the chair of the select board. And I'm trying to start a business, and I'm trying to run have a balanced life here. So it raises that question of what is our real expectation of our elected officials. And when I talk about the time that we put in, not only are we serving on the select board, but I am the liaison to the Economic Development Committee, Natick Center Associates, Natick 180. We appear at different public events such as parades and Little League openings. We are now doing select board office hours on at the farmers market. So the expectations of us being in the field and being more accessible to the community are going up. And that's a good thing. I'm not critical of that. My comment about that is speaking to the fact that as citizens, we should have a layer of elected representation. We should have a level of engagement and accountability that we impose on the people we hire to run our government. But what I do feel strongly about is in our current system, and if you talk to the town administrator, he'd probably concur with me and probably confirm the amount of hours, but I would guess they are spending in excess of 60 to 70% of their time either responding to or preparing for town meeting or interacting with these ad hoc one-off requests of citizens. And this is now in an era where it's very hard to find people to hire and keep. And we're struggling to continue to do more with less. So I think the environment has changed, certainly. The situational reality has changed quite a bit in the last few years coming out of the pandemic. But structurally, that has always been the case. If you look back, even when we first started with the Economic Development Committee in 2009, the first thing I said when we convened that group was, I never want to see this Boston Scientific building vacant. And sure enough, they moved to Marlborough within 6 months of making that statement. At the time, we recognized as business people that we don't have the agility and the ability to respond to commercial dynamics that could drastically affect the well-being of Natick. That includes risks such as the mall closing or MathWorks, which is a private business, $1 billion plus business, but it's privately held. We don't know. Tomorrow they could announce they were acquired by a Chinese conglomerate and be shut down, right? It's not likely, but it's plausible. So things that scare me, even Wegmans announcing that it is closing its Natick store right now. If we were the city of Marlborough, and I'm not proposing we become a city, I want to be clear about that. I have no predisposition for it. Personally, I think we could be, and I think we would thrive, but that's not my intent of any of this. So I want to be very clear about that. But I would say that if you contrast Natick with the city of Marlborough, which has been a city for more than 100 years, their mayor and their professional almost $1 million budgeted Economic Development Corporation would have been in front of that company the minute that announcement was made, and or had known in advance that this was coming because of the personal relationship and the time that they have to focus on economic development. We're in a situation where we've got a very reactive and still growing town administration. And I can't speak more highly about Mr. Erickson and Mr. Marshall and the staff that they are assembling right now. We are very lucky to have the administration that we do. That's part of what scares me as a volunteer. We're very much at risk to lose good people if we don't create a work environment where professionals feel like they can not only do their work, but grow as professionals. And I do feel like the scrutiny we expect from some of these professionals is unreasonable, especially in light of the current hiring environment, which, if many of you are not aware, it's very difficult to find good people and especially to keep good people. So I think there's been this long time coming environment of reactivity, environment of skepticism on behalf of the citizens of its government. In some cases, it's personal. In some cases, it's political. I speak to any of those issues. It depends on the eye of the beholder, so to speak. But what I can say with 100% confidence, based on my many hours of volunteerism, is that if we continue down this path, Natick will continue to miss opportunities. We have missed opportunities to attract employers. We have missed opportunities to change our zoning more quickly. We have missed opportunities to engage the public, in my opinion, more on vision and less on tactics. I think we get so caught up in the how, and everyone wants their hand in the execution of things, that I think we've lacked the ability to get ahead of the challenges of equity and diversity, to get ahead of the ideas of growing our economic base. And in my opinion, that's the role of us as citizens. We all own this town, right? This is our purview, and we want to have that say. Changing the form of government does not necessarily impede that. In fact, I would argue in 2023, it would accelerate and amplify our ability to do that. So I'm of the mind that the best way to do that is to open this concept up to the citizens of Natick. I would argue many of whom, probably more than 2/3, don't even know what a select board is, let alone that we have that select board town meeting form of government, and let alone how it affects their daily life. Most people just say, look, as long as the trash is being picked up, as long as my kids have a good school to go to, as long as there's a park to play in, we're fine. And that might be fine for the affluent people that are now migrating to Natick from Boston and Cambridge and Newton that have 2 earner families generating in excess of $300,000 to $500,000 a year. It's not necessarily fine for people that have been here for decades and are still struggling to stay in their homes. Despite low tax rates, our taxes are going up because the property values of our towns. So we're fighting these dynamics that I believe can be more responsibly handled by a different structure. And I think it's important for us as citizens to engage in this process. So I'm firmly of the belief, and I was when the select boards agreed to start looking at this, I felt at the time we should have just proposed adding a charter commission to our ballot. This is going back to the fall of 2021. So at the time, the select board decided, well, maybe we can look at this by appointing a committee. Let's look at it because we all understand how the government works and we can find people that have a sense of it. It's not necessarily something that the general voters will understand. And I agree with that to a certain point, but I do feel strongly in certain cases that certain issues should be in front of the voters. Okay, and we can contrast that. Mr. Beaumont, I see you're on here, and I know one of the questions, or I anticipate one of the questions is, why is a charter commission good for the ballot, but the dam is not? And I'll shelve that. I will get to that question because that's come up a couple of times when I've talked about governance with people. Everyone participates in government, whether it's strictly as a consumer at one extreme or as an engaged volunteer that's elected at the other extreme. And there are many that volunteer in between as well. So we all engage in government. We all have a say, we all have a role, whether we choose to do it passively by just enjoying the services and paying our taxes, or we do it actively by actually getting involved with our volunteer time. That said, I think it's incumbent on each of us, especially the ones that are engaged, to educate and bring awareness to the community. When I ran for select board this last time, many of you might recall, it was during COVID, it was pre-vaccination. So most of my campaigning, including one appearance on Coffee with a Purpose, was done virtually. And my opponent at the time politically was focused on bringing an equity lens to government. And I 100% agreed with the urgency to bring an equity lens to government. Where I disagreed with my then opponent and where I think embraced how to do things now is that we need to look at our systemic operation, look at everything in its entirety and say, understand where and how there is dysfunction, and let's identify ways we can improve efficiency or improve effectiveness or both. When we talk about equity, and I learned this during the campaign, we have to go to where people are. We have to take the time to bring people that are not necessarily involved in the process into the process, and not just welcome them to sit at the table, but hand them a pencil and a pad of paper, ask for their ideas too. And to me, there is nothing more important than the equity of the decision of how we form our government. And so to me, going to a charter commission, which, if I may, just to define, a charter commission is a state legislative process that basically would put to the voters the decision to create a charter commission, which is a body of individuals that will study forms of government, draft a document which would serve as a tentative charter for the town, and then bring it back to the voters for a vote. So the charter commission process is strictly an election of people to embody this group, a window of time of approximately 1.5 years to create a charter, and then it comes back to the voters to go to the ballot to decide whether or not we like that charter or not. So that's the process of a charter commission. It's mandated by the state, the number of participants, the timelines, all of that is dictated by state law. And so all I'm proposing at this stage is that we assemble and put that on the ballot. Okay, so we'd be looking for people to run for the charter commission and become commissioners. We would look for those individuals to come together and study how Natick is running today, what might need to change. And that doesn't preempt or preclude us from doing some work ahead of time, including the work of some of the folks that are working on the CBRC at the town meeting level and the town governance study committee at the executive level. I've just been talking nonstop for God, what, 15 minutes or so. And I apologize. I wanted to kind of set the table and then I started serving the meal too. So I apologize for that. Are there any questions so far? I know I went through an awful lot with presumption of knowledge on your parts. And I just want to make sure I do see Pat Conway has his hand up. So good morning, Pat. And Sarah, you're in control. So if maybe we can just kind of take breaks along the way to ask questions.
Yeah, so yeah, why don't we go to Pat first since he's got his hand up?
Well, I appreciate the overview, Paul, very much. And I haven't served as long as you, obviously, and a number of people in this group. I would think I was only on town meeting 5 or 6 years. But the way the town is governed and structured is extremely cumbersome. And this level of mistrust that I observed in town meeting for a number of years, the people that are assembled there, the mistrust of their appointed and serving, people like even the select board or the FinCom and all these things was mind-boggling. And I felt bad. I can't imagine. It's not that I felt that town meeting should rubber stamp everything, but the way the process was designed, it seemed to be a haven or a playground for the people who've access to grind and grind and grind and grind. And I just look at our group here, how do you we're a bunch of old people, with a few exceptions. And how do you get younger people with families involved in town government? Who's got the time to spend the time that, God bless the people who do it on FinCom, zoning, whatever, select board like you, Paul. Who's got that time? That's an incredible burden. And, I think we have to come up with something a little more realistic and that's open to participation of people of all ages and encourage and get more of our young and our diverse members of town. We're just an all white old people body. Let's face it. It's ridiculous. It gotta change.
Well,
Thank you. Yeah. Well, we are getting younger and more diverse on the select board. So that's good.
That's good.
But yeah, I think that's part of it. Sorry, I see Ricky's hand is up too.
Yeah, let me just respond specifically to your point about getting people into town meeting. Most of the people that are on this panel today, I won't take credit for all of you, but there are a lot of you who weren't members of town meeting before you got into my lane. And I said to you, hey, there's an opportunity for you to have a voice. Run for town meeting. I'll help you get signatures. Here's an opportunity. There are a lot of open spaces in this precinct. What precinct are you in? Get going, be involved. And it takes a lot of us to do that kind of thing, to get new blood into town meeting and to get young people into town meeting. And there are issues these days that weren't around when I was first in town meeting that are a great, that have great interest in the population at large. I'm talking about conservation and particularly climate and global warming. This is something that really, really is in the wheelhouse of the young people. And it's a way to get them involved in local government. And there may be, there's got to be some way to do this on a more organized scale than one-on-one. But I mean, I'm feeling pretty good when I look around at Carrie and there are a lot of people here that wouldn't be here if somebody hadn't spoken up and said, hey, here's a place to put your passion. And I think we've all got to do that. That's one of the things I'm missing by not living in Natick anymore, because that used to be a fun game for me.
Right.
And so I suggest that that's something that all of us can do and all of us should do. All right, that's just one point. I won't monopolize the conversation, but okay.
All right, Carrie, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, just well, Ricky's completely true. If it wasn't for her, I probably would be still sitting on the couch eating bonbons or something like that. But no, she was an inspiration, got me involved in running for or being at the delegate at the Democratic Convention back in 2018. And just the whole thing in terms of just doing something. I don't want to take too much credit for this because there's a lot of people, some who are here today, who really got this thing moving along. But I talked to Pat back in November 2017 when he was showing a movie at Common Street. And I said, Pat, I know there's a lot of concern about climate change issues. Do you mind if I got up and just made a little pitch about, seeing what we can do about it? I did. It wasn't a very elegant speech, but it was enough to get about 30 people to sign up. And that was nucleus for Renewable Natick. And from the day we had a first meeting till town meeting, we got them to pass a resolution almost unanimously. So, sometimes it just takes a spark. And, I'm certainly not a young person who could have done that, but Ricky's right. We need to get more young people. Just how do we engage them a little bit? I think they see town meeting sort of, as been saying, sort of an old man's club, sort of. So how do we?
No, I was going to say, so if I may, I think, and thank you for that. I remember that was a great, one of several, I think, great moments of town meeting where we had a lot of people representing differing parts and different political perspectives coming together on an issue. I guess when I look at the whole process of what you just talked about, I agree with you. And Ricky, I wouldn't be here without your encouragement and Jay early on when we got started with the override and transition that to other involvement. But where I come from is, if it's incumbent on us to reach out, that process, when you have a bunch, and I'm just paraphrasing or quoting directly, but I don't mean it in specific, a bunch of old white people sitting around reaching out to get people involved is not necessarily going to diversify and sustainably bring new people into it, right? There's implicit bias by who we go to for those initial contacts. But more importantly, even without the bias, I think many of us have done a lot of hard work to make sure that we're reaching out. We have organizations like Natick is United. We just hired a chief diversity, equity, and outreach coordinator for the town. We're making progress on systematic changes to help us be better.
I didn't know about that.
Yes, yeah, and he's fantastic. We could take that offline, or maybe I can mention it later. But that said, even if you do get young people involved, even if you do get them engaged, it comes down to time. I was a flyover parent. We moved back here from Austin, Texas during the dot-com crash. We overpaid for a house in Natick so I could be closer to my commute, so I could see my kids when they were toddlers. And even then, I could barely afford the house that we bought in 2002. And then the real estate market crashed and I was terrified for a few years. And then I got politically involved. But it wasn't until the school was threatened to be closed that pulled me into the whole process. I had no idea what a select board was until that moment in time. Once I had done that, I served for several years, all the way up to serving as select board until I left in 2013. The reason I left in 2013, I had a then 10-year-old and a 9-year-old kid. My wife was going back to graduate school and I was self-employed. I couldn't afford to be a select board member anymore. I couldn't afford to do most of the volunteering that I was doing at that point. Had I been able to afford that time, I would have pushed for a charter commission in 2014 when it wasn't done as I expected it was going to be. I just didn't have the time anymore. I had to rebuild that. And I'm in that same position right now. Here I am, flash forward 10 years later, trying to run something. It's terrifying. I just can't afford this much time. So part of it is, even if you do diversify engagement, you have to get people with the financial situation and the home situation that allows them the luxury to engage in town meetings. Now, if we were to keep town meeting, I'm not saying we should or shouldn't. I personally don't think we should, but we better have a hybrid form of town meeting, because you're not going to get diverse participation unless you have blended or hybrid format for town meeting. And that's kind of a ways off, given how complex that challenge is. We can have it online, we can have it in person, but to do the hybrid together is a very complex technical hurdle, which frankly is solvable, but it's about resources, education, and so forth that gets involved. So we can choose to make what in my opinion, and again, this is all expressly Paul Joseph's personal opinion. There's no initiative to do anything to change any of this right now. But I look at our things that we're focused on right now is to take an misaligned and inefficient system and make it more efficient. I'm proposing changing the system and getting better efficacy. I don't think government is as effective as it can be. It can be more efficient for sure, but I think when we look at the structure of it, I think we can do things more quickly. We can do things, we can do more things, and we can do so with better talent that we can attract and develop locally than we can with the current form. So to me, those are sort of the driving factors. It's one of equity and it's one of employee engagement and retention. Those are sort of the two major ones. And then the third piece, like I said, I think it's the ability to respond to the future unknowns. It's agility.
Thank
The
you.
benefit of having, sorry?
Go ahead, sorry.
But no, it's okay. I was gonna say the ability, you know, if let's just say you go to a council form of government, okay? One hypothetical scenario is we get rid of town meeting, we get rid of the select board, and we have a town council form of government. Counselors in some places work every 2 weeks. They're full-time focused based on their representation. So one scenario could be we have one representative for each of the 10 precincts in town, right? Maybe a couple of at-large counselors as well that convene every 2 weeks. And they're there working with their finance committee or working or participating as a finance committee. Again, there's so many different scenarios of how to govern. But my point is, what if government met every 2 weeks instead of twice a year? Right. Right now, what we do with town meeting is we say, okay, we want to change zoning to accommodate a new developer or to develop or to accommodate an employer or to make a change to our charter. You know, that can take our bylaws. That could take months, right? And if you're dealing with a private sector entity like a big company, why should they do business with Natick when they're, you know, every other town around us is willing, including next door in Framingham, including close by in Marlborough, to pull them into their neck of the woods, give them the tax breaks and work with them one-on-one. So we're in a competitive disadvantage right now by convening town meeting only twice a year. Now, some people say, well, you can always have a special town meeting. True, but you still have to post that town meeting. You have to attract a quorum for that town meeting. And from a business's standpoint, the uncertainty of town meeting is a factor as well. So you're still going to have that uncertainty that you won't have the immediacy of a dialogue that you would have in a council format of government. So that's just one example of what I mean by agility. It's the ability to be full-time focused. Another analogy to that, and this goes to your interests in particular, Saul, and those in precinct 10. What if we had bi-weekly meetings of a council that oversaw our maintenance plan? Would the dam have gotten to the point that it did 10 years ago if we had a different form of government in 2014? I can't say that it wouldn't have, because I can't, you know, honestly, looking at an earthen berm, I don't know what the technicalities of that are. But I can say that the attention would have been more likely and more pervasive had we a more regularly meeting form of government and direct engagement with the administration. So that's just an example of how governance can affect longer term big issues that people care about. Sorry, I see Pat and Catherine.
Yeah, so I think Pat was next. I will say just really quickly from a personal standpoint on the hybrid town meeting thing, in terms of the resources, you know, I understand that it's a very complicated issue, but my observation is town meeting wants to have that hybrid option, and I think it would be supportive of allocating the resources. Again, Sarah Hannah's opinion as an individual, but anyway, Pat, I think you had your hand up next.
I just have a procedural question, Paul. You, in your overview at the beginning, are you recommending, or is it in the works that there will be a charter commission and this is going to be something that's going to happen, or I'm a little unclear about where we are.
Here's where we're at. Paul Joseph asked the town clerk to get the paperwork from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to collect signatures for a charter commission. So I really didn't talk about the charter commission process. Basically, for a town to put a charter commission on the ballot, and only the citizens can do this. The select board puts it on the ballot, but the citizens must sign a petition to do so, and we must secure at least 15% of the registered voters in Natick to do that, which is not an easy feat. So at baseline, that's 3,750 signatures
Wow.
that are valid at the time they're turned in. They get turned into the town clerk's office one time. It can't be on a rolling basis. So not only do those signatures have to be collected, the town clerk's office goes through them, and then we'll literally have to verify each and every one. So if you sign it today and then move out of Natick in August, and the town clerk reviews it in September, your signature doesn't count, right? So we have to collect probably 4,500 to 5,000 signatures to be sure that we've got 3,750.
Wow.
So, and what that will do is basically place a charter commission question on the ballot, should the town form one. And it will open the door for people that want to run for charter commissioner, the opportunity for them to put their names on as prospective commissioners. So you do both at the same time. And the urgency from my standpoint is I would like to see this happen before the next regularly scheduled town election, which is next March. So that's why the urgency on my part. The plan originally for the Town Governance Study Committee, which was appointed by the Select Board, was 12 months in their charge. We're now in month 14, and I hear that they are going to deliver their final report to us June 28th. But the purpose of that committee was never to take the place of a charter commission. It was to give us a study of the effectiveness and the efficiency of government, what's working, what's not, and maybe make some recommendations. And the fact of the matter is that's, it's when we formed it, I was the dissenting voice on the select board at the time. I wanted the report. Frankly, I wanted interim reports so we could have decided by last summer if it looked like structural changes would be in order that would require a charter commission. Because my hope was we put the charter commission on this past year's ballot. That didn't happen. A year later, now I'm being told, well, let's just wait until these two committees finish their work and then we'll see if we need it. Well, now you've got still, if let's presume these changes happen and they're incremental changes, I'm yet to hear anything from any body that's working on this to say that we're considering getting rid of town meeting. From my standpoint, that's the biggest and most important change structurally, because that's the impediment in terms of process to the agility and to the staff risks that we have. Some people say, well, town meeting is the ultimate form of representation, and we can have a discussion about that shortly. But my opinion is it doesn't matter what the recommendations coming out of these two bodies are if they're not studying the overarching question, which is how is town meeting adversely affecting our future? That's the Paul Joseph personal opinion. And that's part of why. So nothing officially has been done, Pat. I've got the paperwork to start it. I've got a bunch of people who are interested in helping start a campaign, but this is going to look a lot like the campaign for the high school or a lot like the campaign for the override. You need a body of interested people. We're going to need a campaign manager. We're going to need precinct representation. We're going to have signs, much like sustainability and what you had done, Carrie. It's going to take a big effort. And that's why the urgency that I feel. If we're going to do this and give people enough time to learn what it is to be an informed voter and to give people enough time to consider running for charter commission, you can't do this at the end of the year. You really need 6 months of planning, prep, and education. So that's why for me the calendar is so important. Sorry, I saw Catherine had her.
I think Catherine, you were next.
Donna has her hand up here too.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I can't see that from here, but okay.
Sure.
All right.
Hi, good morning. A couple of thoughts. When I was first interviewed as a select board member for the Town Governance Committee, I had a list of reforms that I thought could take place within the charter and bylaws that would, make a difference. And then a year and 3 or 4 months into serving on the select board, I have a completely different opinion. And I just want to talk about a few things that you guys have mentioned. First of all, with reference to equity, hybrid would be, a hybrid town meeting would be a great first start, but we cannot do that without state permission. And right now the argument in the committees on the state, at the state level, there are two parties. One is the or two major groups. One is the MMA, Massachusetts Municipal Association, which is the lobbying group for towns and cities, 351 throughout the Commonwealth. And they're saying we need to have the option for a number of reasons, including equity. We need this option of having hybrid town meeting allowed without saying that it's only for health reasons. Because right now, that's why we don't have it. We don't have it because the moderator cannot say that we cannot meet safely. So the MMA is saying, let's give towns flexibility without that caveat. But then there's another group that's hyper focused on transparency that points out that the Massachusetts legislature is the only one of 50 legislators that does not allow the transparency into committee votes. So they're pushing really hard. They're saying, no, that there's going to be absolutely no hybrid unless everything is mandated hybrid. And you know how many small towns we have in Massachusetts? They don't have the resources, the capacity, the technological knowledge to do that. So this last legislature was down to the minute in deciding whether or not there could be hybrid, and they would, I'm going to call them the pro-transparency group, were saying we're only going to allow you we're only going to vote and allow you to do that with this caveat. So hybrid, yes, that'd be great, but that question's out of our hands. The second thing is when we look at our current town meeting, I do see a lot of younger people, but start waiting until like the third night or the fourth night. Many of those young parents are leaving at 9 o'clock. And whether we have a quorum or not at 10 or 10:30 is kind of irrelevant when you have people who are not able to fully participate because they're frustrated, they're exhausted, they've got kids to take care of, they've got school, early morning meetings. So yes, we are attracting more people, but the nature of the way town meeting is run and the time and rules and things like that are discouraging people from continuing. And keep in mind too, that this is a $200 million enterprise. We're not 40 years ago where the budget may have been $100 million and the population was 20,000. With reference to equity, Precinct 1 has very little consistent representation. Precinct 2 is a little bit better, but we're talking primarily about West Natick. When I was running my election, I spent a good deal of time trying to figure out the question of why we don't have representation in Precinct 1. Comes down to three major reasons based on people I've interviewed and looking at the population. One is number of people who are renters, who are getting their first jobs. They need to train into the city and they're not interested in becoming permanently involved. Number two, we have a lot of people there who are not US citizens, who are here on green cards, H-1B visas and J-1 visas, and they are not able to participate. And then number three, we have a large population of Indian and Chinese who are not familiar with the descent, people of Indian and Chinese descent who are not familiar with this form of government, and who people I talk to are really not interested in local governance issues, the traditions and their culture. If they do become involved, it's with the schools. Now, if we move to a council form of government, we're going to have one person elected from that precinct who's going to have to go out and meet those people and represent their interests. Instead of what I see over the last 20 years living in Precinct 2 is this shift from people in much more affluent precincts and people in precincts where people are more involved, where they think about, oh, we need more housing, let's put it in West Natick. So we have the least amount of open space, we have the most amount of rentals, we have the most amount of housing density. So we in precincts 1 and 2 don't really have someone who's in a position. We have people and we can advocate, but we're only a small percentage of 120 people to start taking some of the issues. It's almost like kind of a 21st century redlining, if you will, where you have people in affluence in other parts of the town that are advocating for things for their part of the town, but largely uninterested in what's going on in Precinct 2.
Oh, yeah, I remember. Okay, bye-bye.
And the third thing I would say is Paul has focused a lot on equity, and that's extremely important. I want to bring up economic development. So I've talked to a couple of people here on the screen about this issue, but right now in Natick, it costs $17,100 to educate one child in our school district. in our school precinct, 17,100. In order for you, let's say your home, you have one child, to pay for that child through your taxes in the school system, your home has to be assessed at 1.4 million. And if it's not, and you have two children, you're a net draw on the tax revenue. So, and I'm using these words as a form of shorthand. I'm not saying that, you know, it's a draw necessarily, but let's say your house is 1.1 million and you have one child. You're still not paying for fire, you're not paying for roads, you're not paying for public safety, veterans benefits, social services, town governance, parks and rec, anything. And so what that means is that we have got to expand and develop and protect our economic base and make it easy for businesses to do business in Natick. And when we do that, they will going to be paying a lot of taxes. And those taxes aren't going to be used for the main part of our budget, which is the schools. They'll be paying for roads, public safety, and the things that business uses. So it's very difficult to attract, for example, restaurants and businesses that would require or want a beer and wine license because our alcohol policies are so outdated. Now, we've worked on that. We've passed a lot of changes. They still need to go to the legislature. They need to go to the legislature because the select board in 2010 did not trust future select boards, and they took away the power of home rule. They took they made policies and then they sent them to the legislature to be enshrined in MA law with in MGL, which means that instead of our select board being able to say, look, the laws that were passed, the policies that were passed in 2010 don't work for 2023 in our business environment. Let's just change them because we have that right. Now we have to have we had to have policy meetings, which we did. We went to town meeting, they approved them. Now it's going to go to the legislature. That's going to sit there for another year and a half. Those will not necessarily be signed. And I've talked to Senator Spilka's office and I've talked to Representative Linsky's office, and they say those things take about another year. So we've put off economic development of restaurants, which provide local options taxes, for at least 13 years or more, because we've hamstrung, using our form of government, we've hamstrung future form of governments. So it's a really, really complex question in my mind, where digging down into the data, we see that there has to be a better way than having 120 people meet, whereby on night 5 or 6 or 7, there's 90 people and everyone's praying not for a quorum vote. And businesses standing aside and saying, you know what, we really need to be someplace where stuff can happen, where we can get a piece of property zoned commercial that's already in commercial use. But that took a year, 2 town meetings to do West Central down by Union Street. So that's my pitch. And I'm happy to answer questions about specific data. I'll just jump off. There's some hands up.
All right,
I just think it's refreshing that I'm not talking about economic development. That used to be my drum. Thanks, Catherine. That was huge.
So I guess, Donna, I couldn't see your hand from here, but I think you may be next.
Yeah, no worries. I just have maybe a couple of procedural kinds of questions more than any informational. I'm just wondering, with the Charter Commission, how many members are elected on it and are any appointed? So there's just that procedural kind of thing. And were we to go to a town council form of government, are they salaried? Are the people we elect that meet like every other week, do they receive salaries? And my more lengthy question is about school committee. Does a town council form of government mean that school committee also gets switched to that, so that there's members that are elected from each of the 10 precincts? Because to tip my hat a little bit, some people already think the Natick School Committee is too big, that many communities only have 5 members on their school committee. So I have questions about the effectiveness, the working effectiveness of that. So does the town council necessarily mean school committee switches to that too?
Yeah.
So those are 3 questions. I think the first 2 are pretty.
Yeah, I think so. And truth be told, I raced out of the house without my notes. I'm pretty sure it's 9 in terms of number on the Charter Commission.
Okay.
Catherine backed me up. I'm
Okay.
usually on top of the data too, but it is mandated by the state, and it is the top vote getters. It's not dictated by precinct. So it's basically top vote getters to be appointed as charter commissioners. Okay, so that's the first one. As far as the council or form of government, are they paid? That's a function of the charter that they propose, right? So whether it's a compensated or
Okay.
voluntary position, I would argue, yes, they should be,
Yeah.
because it's going to be that kind of a burden. And frankly, again, both equity, just in terms of just, economics, I think it makes sense. You want good people doing work, you need them focused on it. I think it's only just that we provide some form of compensation. As far as school committee, when I left the board in 2013, I reached out to Franklin and I reached out to Braintree to understand both of theirs. And subsequent to that, I know Amherst has now gone to a council form of government. My understanding is that the mayor in Marlborough is the chair of the school committee.
Right.
My understanding is that the town manager in Braintree is on the school committee. So you have a connection between how they've structured their government, their municipal side with the schools, but I don't think it fundamentally changes the separate election of school committee members or what that is. Now, can the charter itself do that? I believe so. I think that's where it's dictated. So I think that is something that would be potentially on the table. But again, I've not looked at it. Right now, my only goal is let's ask the questions, right? People assume I have this predetermined outcome. I don't, honest to God. I think we need more people looking at this. I need dedicated focus looking at this. And I think all of that's important. We've talked about sort of the structural imbalance between the two sides of the financial house for years. To me, some kind of integration, not necessarily fully, but this idea that you've got continuity across both, that's a wonderful and an important one for the taxpayers, because it at least gives you that bridge. We're very, very lucky right now. And unfortunately, we're losing Anna. But Anna and Jamie, as our superintendent and town administrator, are working fabulously together. That was not the case when I ran. It's funny. I'm seeing preliminary reports that say people are happy with how the town administrator and the superintendent are working together. I was like, well, that's good for the last year. That hasn't been the case for about 10 prior to that. So
Not
right.
when I was on the school committee, so
Right.
I know that, and I just thank you, because I think it's raising all kinds of important questions
Me
that
too.
we maybe haven't looked at and talked about enough as a community, so I think that's important.
Thank you. And to me, part of the beauty of asking the question is it forces us to educate our neighbors. If we want to truly honor what we talk about in terms of equity and engagement of our neighborhoods, this is the ultimate way. And this is where I think we as very engaged people owe the citizens, is the outreach to say, hey, this is where we're at. Is there a better way? Let's solve it together. That's the ultimate rally cry for a charter commission from my standpoint. We end up back where we are right now because people love town meeting and they think it's working, so be it. I disagree with it and I'll campaign against that concept based on my knowledge. I'm just one voice out of 37,000 right now. I have no preconceived notion. I have a suspicion based on my volunteerism, but I'm not trying to impose anything.
They're great questions, and I especially would appreciate and would look forward to any questions that might come up about
Sure.
school committee and efficacy of how that is run.
Yeah, it's a huge one, big part of our budget,
Yeah.
right? And frankly, our future, who are we attracting to the town?
$81 million, yeah.
Absolutely.
I think I see Carrie's hand has been up for a while.
Yeah, thanks. I had just an observation, I guess, following up what Catherine was talking about with town meeting, maybe just a few small questions or points of interest. I remember the first couple nights of town meeting this past session, and looking over some new faces who had just joined and had this look on their face like, what the hell have I got into? I really felt sorry for them. So I don't know. I'm thinking maybe a town council might be a way to go. Second question, Paul, a little while ago, you mentioned pretty much in the same sentence, Marlboro and taxes. And there was a guy whose name I won't bring up now, who's a big proponent of split tax rate. And he was talking about, how it might help Natick. And one of his premise was that, Boston Scientific or Marlboro has a split tax rate, but that didn't prevent Boston Scientific from, abandoning Natick and heading there. One other point, just I keep hearing about Hudson and how they've kind of revamped their downtown area a little bit. And I don't know, Natick is sort of working on that with their 2030 plan, I guess. Any thoughts on that? And the last thing was, is this Wegmans done deal, or do you think there's anything we could do to, keep them in place? I know I throw a lot at you, but have at it.
So split tax rate, I personally think there will be a point in time where we need to look at a split tax rate. I'm not 100% always against anything. I think we always have to understand what the situation is and weigh the pros and cons. When Boston Scientific went to Marlboro, wasn't despite the split tax rate, it's because Fidelity abandoned some buildings and the mayor said, we can get you in here for cheap. And by the way, we're on 495 and you can get people to work faster that are coming down from New Hampshire and other places. So they had a geographic and economic argument to make independent of the tax rate. Now, over time, they also have a lot more land than we do and a lot more vacancies than we do, but they're doing a great job. I will say in my time on the Chamber of Commerce as president of the chamber and dealing with Framingham was doing everything in its power to undo its split tax rate because they were losing people and they could only chip away at it because it was a big problem. They were competitively disadvantaged because of it. Okay. I personally see that as a major, we've got such a high concentration. If you look at Cognex, the mall, and MathWorks, as our major taxpayers, it's like if you start shifting the burden, you're going to 3 organizations, Brookfield Properties, Cognex, and MathWorks. That could have devastating consequences because if any one of those employers pulls out or shuts down, I think we're in for a world of hurt. So I think there's this emotional reaction to split tax rates. It says, yeah, let Wall Street pay for it. Main Street shouldn't have to. Be careful what you wish for. So I'm not a personal fan of the split tax rate for that reason. It keeps us competitive, especially because we don't have an economic development corporation that can go out and market Natick. I mean, the mayor of Marlboro goes down to trade shows and he meets with CEOs and he says, why don't you come to my city and I'll show you what we can do for you. And then he sends the director of the economic development office with their marketing materials to follow up and host the meetings. So they run their economic development like a business. They invest in it. So can they afford the split tax rate? Probably, but they're probably giving, and I know they are giving incentives on the other side to more than offset that split tax rate. So you got to be careful about sort of the details of it. It's not as simple as just splitting the tax rate.
Understood.
As far as Hudson did very well because its downtown is predominantly owned by one landlord that owns 2 major properties there, probably more now. But that landlord had the foresight and intelligence to not only invest in the businesses, a brew pub, an ice cream place, a speakeasy. They really turned that downtown around because of the innovative concepts they put into those storefronts. They also invested in people. So the nephew of the owner of the property is one of the owners of the business. They actually put together workshops and training for the employees of those organizations to improve their customer service skills and to educate them. They paid for certification programs. So they invested not only in the businesses, not only in the town, but the people. On top of that, they also in Hudson have what's called a business improvement district. The property owners themselves voted to put a premium, like we just voted for the CPA, Community Preservation Act, was going to put a surcharge of 1% on our tax bill. They voted to do that on their business bills to basically create a fund to manage the downtown business district. So I would like to see the Golden Triangle become a business improvement district. I would like to see Natick Center become a bid and actually have the merchants, and not just the merchants, but the property owners of downtown put into a fund that could offset the cost of a parking garage. Right. So you can do more when you've got engagement and investment from the local businesses. Hudson's structured uniquely because of its property ownership. We've got fragmented ownership, and now sadly we've got remotely owned businesses. So when Steve Wolf died, the Clark's Block building was bequeathed to his high school alma mater. So that big, beautiful building sits in an investment portfolio and is managed by a company that's not even here. Right. So it's very hard to get them involved because they don't have skin in the game locally. So one of our challenges for downtown economic ownership.
I know.
So that's business district. And then sorry, I lost third one, Carrie.
Okay, I know what I'm doing.
Okay.
Do you think there's any chance of that a way to persuade Wegmans to reverse their decision?
The knee-jerk reaction is no. And I will promptly follow that up with, I'm actually making a phone call later today to understand things more. It caught everybody off guard, including the general management of the mall. So they kept that close to the vest. However, people that were listening is very interesting. Catherine had an interesting story to share about mint leaves and how she saw the writing on the wall. And I had heard from another property owner months ago that they weren't doing well. They weren't hitting numbers. That said, I think there are a lot of creative things we could or should be doing for and with Wegmans if allowed the chance. So never say never, but I'm guessing they made a business decision based on hard data that's going to be very difficult to reverse. And
Yeah.
frankly, we don't have the capacity to do it. If we had a mayor, they'd be in Rochester, New York this morning, I guarantee you.
Yeah, I just suspect it's probably that they're not meeting the numbers. I mean, it's a huge store. I forget how many thousands of square feet and such. And talked about Marlboro sort of giving some, incentives to different companies to offset, the split tax rate there. Maybe there's, a way to do something work. I think it's, I'm not a huge Wegmans fan, but there's some stuff I buy. It's a great store, and it's could be a nice anchor there since we're losing other big stores there at the mall.
Yeah, for sure. The mall, I mean, look, the mall at the end of the day has been great, and it's well located, and we've proven with Tesla, with the new garage, I forget the name of the brand that's there. There's another electric vehicle brand that's slipping my mind. But the entertainment destinations that are going in there, the new miniature golf place that's going to go in there, it's basically becoming a destination retail focus hub. But I will say the loss of the supermarket is going to be tough. I did hear that Sherwood Plaza is going to be getting an organic supermarket coming in as well, so that'll offset the blow a little bit for people that shop in that area.
Ricky, I see you've had your hand up.
Yeah, I have to leave now, but I want to tell you very briefly about something that's happening on Wednesday night at the high school. There will be the first opportunity to present an award to the student project that has the most impact on public service in Natick. It is an idea that our sons David and Alan had that honors, I have to say, Jay and me for our public service, and it's a way of paying it forward to future generations of kids to get them involved in public service. It's Wednesday night at 5:30 at the high school, and there'll be young people who will present their projects, and the winner of it will receive $1,000 check. Wow. To promote their project, and it will be an annual event. And any of you, I thought some of you might be interested in going, so feel free to come. We'll be there. We'll be happy to see you in person. And as I say, it's my kids. They grew up with us in public service, and it starts at when? At 6. Jay says it starts at 6 o'clock. So feel free to come down to the high school, join us, have an eclair, and listen to the kids about what they're doing and how they see themselves in public service. I gotta go. Okay. Thank you. Hope to see some of you there.
Thank you, Ricky.
Okay.
That's
Bye.
exciting with that.
Great tribute.
Right.
Well,
That's the Zoom equivalent of a mic drop.
Right.
Any other questions? I guess just sort of lastly, why a charter commission, why this process? And Saul, I know I kind of mentioned this before. This is a personal opinion, but I think, when it comes, we're a representative democracy. And I know I made this point when we were doing the having the dam discussions last year. I felt like in my 15 years of volunteering in town, I don't think there was ever a more robust engagement, I thought, than the dam process, which predated me running for select board this time around. We had the appointment of the committee, we had a 1.5 years of study, we had 2 different firms engaged, we had us as a select board looking at it. There was a strong call for us to put the dam on the ballot. Why can't the people decide? It's an asset of the people. The dilemma that you've got when you start doing that is it's an emotional issue. It's an emotional issue like the Redmond issue was an emotional issue. In this particular case, it's an emotional issue that has a high degree of technicality, a high degree of uncertainty to it. And so the simple answer is I wasn't even sure at the time what we would put on the ballot. Because if the answer is just put, should the Natick Select Board save the Natick Dam, yes or no, you're asking people to vote for motherhood and apple pie, right? Now, without knowing how much it was going to cost, what the implications were, we couldn't give a responsible ballot question because we didn't have the answers. And part of the hard decision we made as a select board was to make a decision despite imperfect and incomplete information. And that's what executives have to do constantly. And so for me, I felt very strongly that the dam decision, a very technical one with high degree of uncertainty and incomplete information, required your elected representation to make that decision, as we are bound to do by the charter. Okay, could we have put it on the ballot? Yes. I personally think that would have been irresponsible because, like I said, I don't even know what we would have put on the ballot, in fairness. And you've seen some ballot questions, how complex those can get. When you get into dollars, engineering feedback, and all those other things that we have a team of experts with master's degrees and PhDs looking at, I felt strongly that this was one that we needed to make the executive call and let the process unfold, as we are. And again, as we've indicated, we're still open to new information. As far as Charter Commission goes, as I said at the beginning, every one of us has a vested interest in how we're governed, especially in a self-rule environment like New England. I think it's really important that the public has a say in whether or not we look at it and then how we do it. And, you know, with due respect to the board, the committee that we appointed, I think they're doing great work. Tremendous depth of experience, and I like the diversity of experience on the Town Governance Study Committee, but they are not representative of the citizens of Natick. They are representative of the elected and appointed officials of Natick, not necessarily the true voice of everyone. So from an equity standpoint alone, I think it's important to go broader than that committee. And that's why when we appointed them, we made it clear we didn't feel they took the place of a charter commission, but they could give a charter commission a very strong running head start. With the CBRC, equally, I feel strongly that, and as I said this in the public meeting when we voted to endorse the town meeting article to give them the money to do their work, it's the legislative branch's decision to do that. And I think they're empowered to and should be. Every few years, we should be looking at the charter and bylaws and making recommendations. I'm thrilled that we're finally doing it to a degree that I've been trying to get done for more than a decade. I find it curious that the timing coincides with the fact that we lit a fuse 2 years ago, and now all of a sudden everyone wants to study the form of government more deeply. It's all good. Is the opportunity for a charter commission diminishing or reducing the impact or value of these other bodies? Absolutely not. In my opinion, the more the better. And so if we have multiple sets of eyes, multiple bodies with diverse and divergent experiences coming together with information, you're basically adding tiles to the mosaic and making it a clearer picture for people. So as far as I'm concerned, whatever recommended changes come about, a charter commission's recommendations, by the way, won't happen for several years. It's going to take 1.5 years just to study it. Then it has to go to the ballot. It's entirely possible the voters reject the ballot the first or second time, right? So this could be a 5 years long process with the charter commission. In the meantime, the Charter and Bylaw Review Committee might come up with 3 things to do: to shrink town meeting, change its structure a little bit, to make town meeting more efficient. That's great. That's important. Same with the Town Governance Study Committee. Maybe they're going to come up with similar recommendations. And I encourage those 2 bodies to talk. Just because they've been appointed by different sides of government doesn't mean they can't communicate and share their information. So to me, this is all good, but it's not one or the other. It's an and, not an or. And to me, the urgency of Charter Commission is because this process takes a long time, because supposedly we've been thinking about this for more than a decade. It's time for us to be intellectually honest with ourselves and say, why haven't we done it? And what's the cost of not doing it now? Had we done this before COVID, we might have even done better. I don't think we could have done much better than we did coming through COVID. I have to say, the staff we've got, the volunteers that were involved, phenomenal job. We were lucky to have the leadership of the superintendent, the leadership of the interim, and now Jamie as town administration, and even the interim town administrator, Bob Rooney, was instrumental during that time. And not to overlook longtime town employee Jim White and heading up the health department and the work that he had done with our safety committee and so forth. There was a lot of people and effort getting through the pandemic. People are throwing a lot of grenades at our governance and at our system right now because of things that aren't being done. I implore people to remember what these people were doing 2 and 3 years ago on our behalves. So when people are critical about what hasn't been done at town hall, take a step back and remember that we were having fistfights over toilet paper 2.5 years ago, right? So to me, these are the very human sides of government that, people are be impatient with the process, but please be patient with people, right? And that's where I'm horribly impatient with our process at this point, and that's why I'm a screaming meanie about it. But I absolutely respect and appreciate the work of the people that are doing the people that are doing the work, both on the volunteer side as well as our staff. So anyway, I'm off the soapbox. You a lot of hands up, so I'll stop.
Carrie, you're next, I think.
Yeah, I don't mean to dominate the question process here. I just thought, before we run out of time here, since we have a member that was part of the governance committee, study committee, just hear a few words from Saul Bauman if he wants to speak up and let us know what his experience was and thoughts about this whole thing. Not to put you on the spot. So,
I'm not sure if he heard you.
Yeah, it looks like he might be frozen. Oh,
Nope.
no, he is not frozen. Okay.
yeah, before we left, I just want to see if you might want to speak up a little bit about, your experience with the, government study committee and such, and thoughts and such.
Can't
Yeah,
see.
perfect.
Are you asking me? Is that,
Yeah.
oh, okay, yeah.
It's your
Yeah, what we're looking at in the Charter Bylaw Review Committee is absolutely everything in the charter and bylaw. We're reaching out, we're just starting this week to reach out to every committee and commission in the bylaws to see what they would feel is important to change and what they have to change. In fact, we haven't arranged it yet, but we're going to be someone will sit with the select board also, the town administrator, everybody in town. Now, that's probably a faster way to make changes or to think about changes than waiting to get it on the ballot, and the process is a 5-year process. Possibly we do both, but we are taking a more active approach. We're not doing this to look for the periods and the commas and the spelling. We're looking for substance of what goes on in town. So it's much different than in the past.
Thank you. Thank you, Saul. That's helpful to know. So I think, Brinley, I think your hand's been up for a while, and then I understand that Bill also has his hand up, so we'll go to him after Brinley.
Hi, thanks. I wanted to say thank you very much to Catherine for bringing her insights, and to Paul for bringing your presentation. I support this. As you know, Paul, I've been vocal about that, having been involved in paying attention to our government for a long time. I would like to say that I think that I've been trying to increase participation in town meeting from precinct 1 and precinct 2. And I do believe, in addition to everything that Catherine mentioned, timing and education is the biggest. I regularly get a sense from people that are eligible to participate that they don't participate because of their own sense of competency and ability. And now that I have been a town meeting member through more than a few sessions, I can see that. I can understand it entirely. I do spend a lot of time to do my homework to understand what it is. So I do think that this is an important thing for us to look at. One of the things that I really appreciated from the Town Government Study Committee, so the one that Donna is on, with, the one that Carol Gloff and Josh and all of those members are a part of, is their last public presentation was April 10th, and I put links in the chat. And I feel like their presentation they did put together was more informational about government and government options. And I think that they did a fantastic job of presenting history and overview. And I highly recommend for anybody that's interested to look at that presentation. I put the link to their website and the link to the presentation at the top. It doesn't answer questions about where we should go, but it does. It gives a novice ideas of what local government looks like in Massachusetts. And then my last comment is appreciating our sense of time, that it's 10:20 and where we are moving forward. I would love to hear from Paul about your call to action. what's next? Do we tell you, yay, we're happy to help, or we're happy to sign the petition, or what is your call to action moving forward? Thanks.
That's my question. So, yeah, let me just reiterate. Paul, what can we do to help? You've got a group of active folks who are concerned about these issues. What can we do to help?
Thank you. That's this part of why this is the first kind of broader conversation I've had on the topic, to be honest with you. I think people assume I've already got this like committee formed and all that stuff. No, we need to form a committee. We need to get organized. And my thinking was at some point in the next week or two to gather folks that are interested in moving in this direction, to host a meeting or two to talk about it. I think it's to succeed. I think it's important to get representation from all 10 precincts. It'd be lovely to get people with experience in our town government involved in this decision making as well. But I basically got, if I remember the count, I want to say, oh gosh, was it 43? I've got a lot of form. No, each one has 45 on it. So I've got in excess of 100. I think it's 108 petitions that need to be signed. So I think a canvassing effort, and they all have to be wet signatures. This cannot be done electronically. They have to be physical signatures and they have to be legible. So this is a very, very concerted effort. So I guess what I'd like to do is, if you are interested, share with me your email. And what I'll do is put together a doodle poll and start just getting maybe 2 or 3 organizational meetings together for people. We're going to need somebody to run it. I certainly can't in my current volunteer capacity. I just don't have it. But I know there are enough interested people out there that we can get something going. So I'm happy to host meetings. I've got the paperwork here. And we'll start there, but I'm not as well organized as people think. I've been hearing some funny things that they think I've got this like, organization chaos or specter going as far as town government, and I have neither. I just have a bunch of papers that haven't been, one has been started to be signed. That's about it. So thank you for asking. So definitely, but think of this as a broad campaign, whether it's, as your recall of what Yes for Natick was for the override or for the high school, or think about it for Eco Natick and what we had done for sustainability. Energize Natick, I think that it's important that we have a broad coalition of people that understand the issue. And then I think what we need to do is create some talking points to educate people about it and so forth. And Lord knows I'm not the person to write those, too many words. So. Thank you. Brevity is the soul of wit. I will say also, just if I may, oh, I lost my train of thought. There was one other clarification I wanted to make about, city. A lot of people say I don't want us to become a city. When you look at definitions of forms of government, even a town council or form of government is technically a city form of government. You can be a city known as the town as, like Braintree and Franklin are both city forms of government, but they are known as the town of Braintree, known as the town of Franklin. I challenge people that have a visceral reaction to the word city. Why? I was having this conversation yesterday. We had a little bit, but it's like, my experience, and I talked this through with a friend of mine, and I'm just putting a hypothetical out there. People are against city either because they feel like they're losing control and it's empowering too few people with too much control, or it's probably in some ways, and again, this is not being, I don't mean to say this in a judgmental way, but we culturally that tend to think of a city as an urban environment. And when we think of urban environments, that starts getting to this question of racism, right? And are we having a visceral reaction that's reinforced by our media, our upbringings, and so forth? I know personally as a second generation, when I hear about white flight and when I hear about what Boston used to be to my relatives, older relatives, to me, that's a reflection of redlining and the culture that formed because of that. I see a lot of just initial resistance to this idea of a city, but I hope as we go through this process, part of the education, this is just about a structure of governance. This isn't about putting up high rises and changing our environment and tearing up green space and making impervious surfaces all over Natick. This is about actually how we operate and can we do it more efficiently and frankly have more voice and more diverse voices in this, as opposed to the perception of diversity and the perception of more voices. Because at the end of the day, when you look at what decisions are actually being made, it's still relatively few that are making decisions on the whole. And at the same time, we're grading on the very people that we're hiring to implement the things we need done. So it's an interesting time, and I really greatly appreciate the opportunity to share these ideas with everyone. So thank you.
All right, well, we are approaching 10:30, so try to wrap up here. Paul, thank you so much. This has been, I know for me, very informative because I've heard this discussion going on periodically over the years, and I know it is a lengthy process, so it's interesting to, see it maybe take a jump toward something happening in 5 years. Does anyone have one final question, comment, thought before we wrap up?
I just would like to say I've had a couple people message me directly, and I will make sure that I send the links to you guys, Doug and Sarah, to make sure that they are in the follow-up email, if that's okay to include for the town governance committee links that I put in there. I'll make sure
Yes,
that-
thank you for putting those in there, Brinley. I did see those.
I'll make sure I get those to you so that you can hopefully put them in the follow-up email.
Awesome, thank you. So I just want to mention next week our speaker will be Paul Carew and one of his associates talking about various veteran services available, and I think that will be an interesting topic. And my husband has returned from his thing. I'll let him say anything he wants to say.
Yeah, we're looking forward to, so Polly, I guess this is the Doc and Polly show that's been promised for a long time, right? We're looking forward to that next week.
Yeah, myself and I'll be talking to Doc in a half an hour. We're doing it on Zoom.
Yeah.
We're both looking forward to it also, Doug and Sarah. I think it's gonna be great to
Good.
get more information on what we do.
Yeah. And then the following Monday is Juneteenth. And I want to encourage everybody to attend in person at Metro Works because we'll be having a shorter session that day, because at least a couple of folks involved in the session will be headed over to the library to participate in the Frederick Douglass reading, which starts at 10 o'clock. So that'll be a shortened session that day. But we're looking forward to that. Bishop Frank Kelly, I believe, is going to be our principal speaker, possibly others associated with Natick for Black Lives Matter. And after that, our schedule's open. So anyone who's got suggestions for speakers, either of their own topics, Carrie, I'm looking at you. I know you're putting your Egypt slideshow together.
I'm still working on it with the free
Yeah.
time. It's just whittling
Right.
slides, getting the
Right.
presentation. It's gonna
Yeah.
happen.
Good. And I see somebody at MetroWorks has their hand up, but I can't see who it is.
It's me, it's Donna. I just wanted to dovetail on what you said about Juneteenth and say that the afternoon part starts at the Common at 1 p.m. And it's going to kick off with Natick for Black Lives Matter is going to have a small reception in honor of Kristen Pope as the first woman, Black woman to serve on the select board, a cake and refreshments. And I think it's going to just be a lovely continuation of a Juneteenth celebration.
Excellent. Thanks for that heads up. Good.
All right.
All right.
On the Common or on the street?
It's going to be outside on the Common.
Okay.
Yeah, good. I'm go ahead and stop the recording at this point.
I realized I forgot to mention one thing in the links that I posted. I also posted the general law links for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that talks about home rule and charter revision, and it's a very interesting that it's an easily navigable site. The state site is, and the links that I put in for that talk about charter commission and give some more of the logistics if anyone's looking for that.
Thanks, Brinley.
Sounds good.